The fluorescent lights hummed like distant artillery fire. Ashley Cooper moved through Seattle General's emergency department in Philadelphia with the practiced efficiency of someone who had once worked in darkness, who knew how to move fast without moving loud, who understood that survival meant being invisible until the moment you couldn't afford to be. 47 minutes. That was how long Dr. Whitfield had been in the building before the helicopters came. But she didn't know that yet. Nobody did. The night shift had started at 11 o'clock, and by midnight the ER was running at half capacity, 3 trauma bays open, 2 occupied, the rest waiting. Ashley preferred the quiet shifts. The night shift meant fewer administrators, fewer people asking questions, fewer people noticing the way her hands moved when she worked. Her fingers had a particular kind of steadiness that didn't come from nursing school alone. The kind that came from holding someone's intestines in place while mortar rounds fell. The kind that came from tying tourniquets in the dark. The kind that came from 20 years of deliberately trying to forget. She stood at the nursing station reviewing charts when Dr. Whitfield arrived, his presence announcing itself before his voice did. Italian loafers clicked against linoleum. Designer tie, silk, probably $700, maybe more. The kind of man who believed his possessions were extensions of his competence. Ashley didn't look up from the patient file she was reading, but she registered everything, the scent of expensive cologne cutting through the antiseptic, the way his shadow fell across the desk, the barely perceptible tension in his breathing that meant something had annoyed him before he walked through those ER doors. Cooper. Not a greeting. A summons. She finished writing her note, a complete entry, every detail, every observation from the patient's chart cross-referenced against the billing code submitted to insurance. The discrepancies were subtle if you weren't looking, obvious if you were. She kept looking. Doctor. She closed the chart and turned to face him, her expression neutral as chlorine water. Whitfield's jaw tightened. He was the chief of medicine at Seattle General, which meant he answered to the hospital president but answerable to virtually no one else. He had been chief for 8 years. In that time, his departmental budget had tripled, his income had quintupled, and his reputation among staff had calcified into something between resentment and fear. The residents called him the machine. The nurses called him worse, but never where he could hear it. "I'm implementing new documentation standards," he said, his voice smooth as polished marble. "More efficient. Less detailed." Ashley met his eyes. Said nothing. Patient charts are becoming unwieldy. Bloated with unnecessary information. He stepped closer, his fingers brushing the edge of her desk. Insurance reviews these charts. They make decisions based on what's written. Too much detail can create confusion. Confusion leads to questions. Questions lead to audits. There it was. Not a suggestion. A threat wrapped in administrative language. "I understand, doctor." He smiled. It was the kind of smile that belongs on the face of a man who believes he's just successfully intimidated someone. "I knew you would. You're one of the competent ones, Ashley. The competent ones understand how things work." He walked away, his loafers clicking their rhythm back through the ER, leaving behind the wake of his cologne and something else, the particular smell of greed, if greed had a scent. Antiseptic couldn't cover it. Nothing could cover it. Ashley reached into her scrub pocket and touched the challenge coin there. Tarnished silver, about the size of a $50, its edges worn smooth by 20 years of nervous hands. Both sides were etched with symbols that meant nothing to anyone who had never earned them. On one side, a trident surrounded by a wreath of lightning bolts. On the other side, a name that didn't exist anymore, a rank she had surrendered, a set of coordinates in Fallujah, Iraq, and the date, 2004. May 17, 2004. The coin was the only thing she had left that proved Master Chief Petty Officer Ashley Cooper had ever been real. She did not touch the scar on her forearm. Not here. Not in public. The scar could wait until she was alone, until she was in her car in the parking lot at 3 in the morning, until she could press her palm against the parallel lines without anyone asking questions. 3 bullet wounds, 3 scars, 3 permanent reminders that she had survived things that were supposed to kill her. And none of it was supposed to matter anymore. None of it was supposed to touch her here, in this fluorescent-lit cathedral of routine medical care, where her hands had become competent through different means, where she had learned to be invisible. The ambulance alert tone chimed at 12:11 a.m. Incoming trauma. That was the sound that changed everything, though Ashley didn't know it yet. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the overhead speakers, incoming code blue. 73-year-old male, acute stroke, unresponsive, ETA for minutes. Seattle General, prepare trauma 1. Nurses mobilized. The controlled chaos of ER preparation began, crash carts positioned, monitors tested, for stands rolled into place. Dr. Whitfield emerged from his office, his expression already calculating. Ashley knew that look. It was the look he wore when he was doing math, the particular kind of math that involved insurance reimbursement codes and resource allocation percentages. The ambulance arrived for minutes and 13 seconds later. The patient was a man in his 70s, his body rigid with stroke damage, his breathing coming in shallow gasps through an oxygen mask. But it was his eyes that caught Ashley's attention first. Even unconscious, even in the grip of neurological catastrophe, there was something about those eyes. They had seen command. They had seen authority. They had seen things that changed people. Dr. Whitfield stood at the ER entrance as the paramedics wheeled the gurney past. Name, he asked, his pen hovering over the admission form. Marcus Webb. 73. No family on scene. Found unresponsive in his home approximately 2 hours ago. Imaging will be needed immediately to rule out hemorrhagic stroke versus ischemic. This patient requires immediate neurology consult and probably ICU admission. Whitfield wrote the name down. Paused. Something flickered across his face, recognition, maybe, or calculation. Insurance information. Medicare. Patient is military retiree. The paperwork's in his wallet. Whitfield nodded slowly. His eyes moved from the patient to the paramedics to the nurses preparing the trauma bay. Ashley watched the moment his expression shifted. She had seen it before, the precise second when Dr. Whitfield looked at a patient and made a decision that had nothing to do with medicine. Neuroimaging presents significant resource challenges, he said quietly, speaking mostly to himself. ICU bed allocation is constrained. Medicare reimbursement on acute stroke cases is inadequate compared to the actual costs of intervention. He looked at the paramedics. Transfer him to Trauma 2. We'll get a preliminary assessment. Trauma 1 is ready, one of the nurses said. Trauma 2, Whitfield repeated. There was no inflection in his voice. It was a statement of fact, a command, a decision already made. He turned and walked away before anyone could argue. The paramedics exchanged glances. The nurses said nothing. Marcus Webb was moved to Trauma 2, a bay meant for observation patients, for cases that were borderline, for people whose insurance situations needed clarification before significant resources were committed. Ashley positioned the monitor leads across the patient's chest. His heart rate was 104. His oxygen saturation was 92% and declining. His blood pressure was elevated, 168/94, the result of the stroke's damage to his regulatory systems. Everything about his vital signs screamed that this man needed aggressive intervention immediately. Everything about Dr. Whitfield's decision screamed something else entirely. She was preparing the for setup when Whitfield reappeared with a phone in his hand. He dialed without looking at the number. Someone picked up on the second ring. Marcus Webb. 73-year-old male. Acute stroke, Medicare, no family on scene, neuroimaging will be required. Whitfield paused, listening. I'm aware of our resource constraints. Exactly. I've already placed him in Trauma 2 for observation pending administrative review. Another pause. Yes. I'll speak with the attending physicians about the cost-benefit analysis. He hung up and looked directly at Ashley. I need to speak with the neurology attending. Page Dr. Brennan. "Yes, doctor." But when Ashley paged the neurology attending, something unexpected happened. Dr. Brennan answered the page but didn't respond to the overhead announcement. Instead, a message came back through the hospital system: neurology consult unavailable at this time. Patient will be reviewed once initial labs are completed. That wasn't standard protocol. Neurology consults on acute stroke cases were supposed to be stat immediately, without delay. The time from symptom onset to intervention could mean the difference between recovery and permanent disability. But the message had come from Dr. Whitfield's direct authorization, routed through the attending physician scheduler. The system was being used exactly as it was designed to be used, with perfect bureaucratic precision to do something that had nothing to do with medicine. Over the next 40 minutes, 4 different physicians were called to evaluate Marcus Webb. Each one spent approximately 90 seconds in the trauma bay before leaving. Each one found reasons to decline taking the case. Dr. Whitfield appeared at each of their exits, his hand on their shoulders, his voice low, his words about resource constraints and inadequate reimbursement and departmental budget targets. Ashley watched the pattern emerge. She had seen incompetence before. This wasn't incompetence. Incompetence was random, chaotic. This was a system, orchestrated, precise. This was someone with power using that power to systematically ensure that a specific patient would not receive treatment. She touched the challenge coin again. Just once. Just enough to remind herself of something she had been trying to forget for 20 years. The problem with being invisible for 2 decades is that you forget how to be seen. The problem with being competent is that competence, when applied to noticing things, makes you dangerous to people who don't want to be noticed. Ashley Cooper read the charts. She read the insurance codes. She read the refusals. And she understood exactly what was happening. The Grand Rounds amphitheater was packed, 40 residents, medical students, attending physicians, all arranged in tiers like a Roman Colosseum. Ashley stood at the back wall, her body angled to the side in a position she perfected over 18 years, present but invisible. Dr. Whitfield took the podium. He was a tall man with the kind of tailored suit that announced itself, the fabric cutting clean lines as he moved. His voice carried the particular timbre of someone used to being obeyed without question. "Let's discuss a case study in what not to do," he began, his hand spreading in a gesture of performance. Nurse Cooper here decided that questioning a physician's treatment plan was appropriate. "Tell me, Nurse Cooper, when did you attend medical school?" Scattered nervous laughter rippled through the amphitheater. The residents watched her face carefully, the way students watch a teacher to understand what happens to people who step out of line. Ashley's expression remained flat. Her hands were clasped behind her back, fingers steady. "Stand up straighter when I'm addressing you," Whitfield snapped. His eyes had that particular brightness, the look of someone who'd found an opening and was pressing into it. This is exactly the kind of insubordination that compromises patient care. Perhaps our little Florence Nightingale here thinks she knows better than physicians with decades of experience. He let the words hang in the air, waiting. Watching for flinching, for tears, for the defensive response that would justify whatever came next. Ashley's jaw clenched. Once. Barely perceptible, the kind of micro-expression that vanishes in half a second. Then it released. Her eyes didn't waver from the middle distance, looking through him rather than at him. Whitfield's smile tightened, just slightly. The fact that she hadn't reacted seemed to irritate him more than if she'd shouted back. He turned to the residents. "This is what happens when we fail to establish clear hierarchies. When nursing staff forget their place." The residents took notes. The message was being encoded in real time: question authority and this is what happens. 2 hours later, Ashley stood at the vending machine on the 3rd floor. The machine was ancient, the kind that groaned and shuddered when you selected your item. She pressed the button for black coffee, and the spiral mechanism cranked forward with a mechanical wheeze. The cup dropped into the receptacle with a plastic clink. Whitfield appeared beside her with 3 residents in tow. He hadn't walked over, he'd positioned himself, timed his arrival to maximize the audience. The residents immediately stopped what they were doing. The nurse's station fell into that specific quiet that comes right before something bad happens. "Ah, there's our problem employee," Whitfield said loudly enough for 7 people to hear clearly and 2 more to catch fragments of. "Tell me, Cooper, do you actually read the protocols, or do you just enjoy making everyone's job harder?" Ashley retrieved her coffee from the dispenser. The cup was still warm, steam rising from the opening. Whitfield leaned closer, his voice dropping to the register that somehow carried further than a shout. "Your performance review is coming up. I'd hate to see team player marked as an area of concern." Again. He let that word hang again, with a weight of accusation behind it. The residents were pretending not to listen. One of them was typing on her phone. Another studied the floor tiles with intense focus. The message was being reinforced: "Don't associate with this woman. She's marked." Ashley turned from the machine and walked past Whitfield as though he hadn't spoken, her stride exactly the same as it had been before, her hands exactly the same temperature, her breathing exactly the same rate. She didn't acknowledge him. She didn't flinch. She didn't quicken her pace or slow it down. She simply existed past him and continued toward the medication room, and the most infuriating thing she could have done was give him absolutely nothing to work with. She heard Whitfield's laugh behind her, a sharp bark of something that wasn't quite amusement. 30 minutes later, Ashley was alone in the supply closet. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead with their particular high-frequency hum that no one ever mentioned but everyone heard. Boxes of gauze were stacked on metal shelves. The room smelled like antiseptic and plastic and the particular odor of sealed medical equipment. A hand went to the pocket of her scrubs. The challenge coin was there, where it always was, the size of a quarter, tarnished silver with military insignia worn smooth by 20 years of being carried. She pulled it out and her fingers closed around it, white-knuckled, pressing the edges into her palm until the cold metal bit into skin. Her breathing was different now. Controlled. The kind of breathing a person learns in places where breathing the wrong way means not going home. In and out. 4 counts in, 6 counts out. The trembling wasn't fear. It was restraint. She pressed the coin harder. Counted to 10. Counted to 20. Then she slipped it back into her pocket, straightened her scrubs, and walked out of the supply closet as if nothing had happened. That afternoon at 1447 hours, Whitfield cornered her outside the medication room. 2 security guards happened to be passing, though nothing about this was accidental. They moved with the particular posture of men who'd been told someone was a problem and were prepared to be a solution. "One more unauthorized chart review, Cooper, and these gentlemen will escort you out. Permanently." Whitfield smiled, and there was something reptilian in it, the smile of something that had decided you were food. "Do we understand each other?" Ashley met his gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Not challenging. Not submissive. Just a flat acknowledgement from someone looking at a fact. Then she nodded once, an economical motion, and turned back to the medication tray she'd been preparing. She continued her work, checking labels, cross-referencing names, her hands moving with the precision of someone who'd done this 10,000 times. Each movement was deliberate, controlled, revealing nothing. Revealing everything. The message she was sending was clearer than any words: "You don't scare me." Which meant something else: "I'm scared of nothing you can do." Whitfield stood there for 8 more seconds, waiting for something: contrition, argument, fear. When he received only her perfect professional silence, he turned and walked away, his shoes clicking sharply against the tile floor as he left. The security guards followed him, but they both glanced at Ashley as they passed. Something had registered with them in those 2 seconds of her gaze meeting Whitfield's. The kind of something that makes trained men recalibrate their threat assessment. The ambulance bay doors slammed open at 2147 hours. Ashley automatically noted the time the way combat medics note distances and wind speeds, data becoming context becoming survival. Paramedics rushed in with a gurney, and she was already moving, her body reading the scene before her mind caught up. The patient was male, late 20s, athletic build despite the medical emergency. He wore dress blues with the distinctive rank insignia of a general officer. His hands were moving frantically in ASL, American Sign Language, fluid and desperate, his eyes wide with panic and the particular fear of someone who can't hear warnings coming. Stroke protocol, the lead paramedic shouted over the noise of the bay. Patient is deaf, couldn't communicate symptoms to bystanders. Found collapsed at a military event downtown. Vitals stable in transport but neurological decline ongoing. Ashley began the stroke assessment immediately, her hands moving through the familiar choreography, pupils, facial droop, arm drift, speech. But she froze for half a heartbeat, the kind of pause that's too quick to see but long enough to feel something shift in the room. The paramedic handed her the military ID, and Ashley's fingers brushed the plastic. General Marcus Webb, Special Forces Command. Her fingers didn't tremble, but something in her face flickered, recognition, grief, something from a place she'd sealed away 20 years ago. She slid the ID into the chart and continued working, each movement precise, each motion exactly where it should be. Dr. Reynolds, the on-call neurologist, examined Webb for 90 seconds before shaking his head. Whitfield's orders. We're at capacity for uncompensated care this month. Transfer him to county. Ashley's pen stopped mid-notation. Is actively stroking. County is 40 minutes away. Reynolds still wouldn't meet her eyes. Not my call. Over the next 6 hours, Ashley watched 19 more physicians rotate through Bay 7. Dr. Chen, insurance pre-auth isn't approved. Nothing I can do. Dr. Patel, too resource-intensive for our census targets. Hospital policy. Dr. Morrison, Whitfield specifically flagged this case. Hands off. Each refusal was documented carefully in Webb's chart, each one another brick in the wall of no one will help you that was being constructed in real time. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was watching General Webb's hands in Bay 7. Watching them tremble as he tried to sign for help, his movements becoming uncoordinated, the right arm drifting lower with each passing hour as the stroke advanced into the deep structures of his brain. Watching a man who'd survived firefights and ambushes and the pressure of command gradually lose the ability to communicate his terror to the only person in this hospital who was actually looking at him. Ashley stood outside Bay 7, and her hand went to her pocket where the coin waited. She pressed it between her fingers and made a choice that would change everything. She was going on break. The break room door swung shut behind her at 0247 hours, and Ashley's hand trembled for exactly 3 seconds before she pressed it flat against the cold tile wall. Not from fear. From the weight of what she was about to do. She pulled the tarnished challenge coin from her scrub pocket, the one she'd pressed into a child's hand in Fallujah 20 years ago, the metal worn smooth by her fingers during 1,000 sleepless nights, and stared at the faded insignia. Master Chief Shadow. That name didn't exist anymore. That woman didn't exist anymore. And yet. She returned to Bay 7 at 0251 hours. General Webb's chart lay open on the monitor stand, and the numbers told a story 20 physicians had refused to read. Stroke index elevated. Cardiac output declining. Ejection fraction 31% and dropping. The monitor traced a rhythm that looked almost normal if you didn't know what to listen for, a sinus tachycardia that was actually decompensation wearing a disguise. Ashley began documenting vitals every 15 minutes, technically within her nursing scope but functionally assuming care no physician would provide. She started a secondary full line with practiced efficiency, the needle sliding home through tissue with the subtle resistance she'd learned to feel in her fingertips during 18 years of this work. She adjusted Webb's positioning to optimize cerebral blood flow, tilting the bed head up at 30 degrees, her movements economical and precise as a surgeon's. Continuous cardiac monitoring was already running, 3 leads adhered to his chest, the electrodes pale against his skin. The monitor's rhythm strip scrolled across the display in green and white, each heartbeat a small victory. At 0320 hours, footsteps approached Bay 7's doorway. Whitfield. His presence filled the space like diesel exhaust, heavy, suffocating, deliberate. Ashley didn't turn from the monitor. She'd learned in Fallujah to read threats through peripheral vision while maintaining operational calm. What part of transfer to counties was unclear, Cooper. His voice carried the confidence of a man who'd never had to repeat himself to anyone who mattered. Ashley's fingers continued their work, adjusting before drip rate. No physician has signed transfer orders. Until they do, he's my patient. Whitfield stepped closer. The fluorescent lights overhead cast his shadow across Webb's bed like something with teeth. You're playing a dangerous game. I've already called the billing department about your previous chart audits. One more step out of line, and I'll have enough documentation to ensure you never work in healthcare again. His voice dropped to a whisper, and that was somehow worse than shouting. Whispers were premeditated. Whispers meant he'd thought this through. He pulled out his phone, and Ashley watched him compose 3 messages in rapid succession, his thumb stabbing at the screen like a man killing something. I'm contacting the hospital president, the state medical board, and my friends at Channel 7. By morning, everyone will know about the nurse who thinks she's a doctor. He left without waiting for a response. In Ashley's experience, that meant he was confident the response no longer mattered. She returned to Webb's bedside. The cardiac monitor beeped its steady rhythm. The ventilator wheezed its mechanical song. And Ashley made a decision that felt like falling. She began signing in ASL, her hands moving through the grammar of a language she hadn't used in 20 years. I don't know if you remember Fallujah. I don't know if you remember the medic who, the words hung unfinished because Webb's eyes suddenly locked onto hers. His right hand moved weakly, his fingers trembling with the effort, and he formed a single sign, shadow. Her combat call sign. The call sign that belonged to someone who no longer existed. The call sign that had been erased from every database, every official record, every military archive. The call sign that only a child who'd survived a compound breach in Jolan District, Fallujah, in November 2004 would know. The cardiac monitor alarm screamed. Webb's rhythm shifted violently from sinus tachycardia to ventricular fibrillation. The green line fragmented into chaos. Asystole. No organized electrical activity. The monitor's alarm became a shriek, and somewhere in the back of Ashley's mind, a clock began counting down. 90 seconds until permanent brain damage. 180 seconds until death became inevitable. She hit the code button with the flat of her hand. The button sank satisfyingly under her palm, and across the hospital, the overhead intercom would activate. Code Blue, Bay 7. Code Blue, Bay 7. Within seconds, the crash cart would arrive. Within seconds, the resuscitation would begin. Within seconds, everything she'd built in the last 2 decades would collapse like a building designed to fail. Ashley moved on muscle memory that belonged to someone else. She grabbed the crash cart, her fingers closing around handles worn smooth by 10,000 other hands. She positioned the defibrillator pads on Webb's chest, one below the right clavicle, one at the mid-axillary line. The device hummed to life, analyzing the rhythm with the cold certainty of machines that have learned to recognize death. Analyzing, the synthesized voice announced. Shock advised. Charging. The pads delivered 300 joules, and Webb's body convulsed once, a puppet dancing on electricity strings. The monitor showed still nothing but chaos. Still nothing but the splintered green line of a heart that had stopped communicating in any language that mattered. No physician appeared. No backup arrived. The code was called, but the hospital's attending physicians, all 20 of them who'd seen Webb's chart, all 20 who'd been personally visited by Whitfield with his reminders about budget targets and reimbursement codes, all 20 who'd learned the cost of defiance in an institution where Dr. Whitfield's favor was worth more than the life of a deaf general, remained absent. Ashley didn't wait for them. She pulled the crash cart's drawer open with her left hand while her right hand already held the scalpel. The blade was cold and precise, a surgical instrument designed for people who knew how to use it. She'd trained on cadavers in field hospitals where the closest backup was 2 kilometers away across hostile territory. She'd trained on chest after chest while rounds of fire walked through corrugated walls. She'd trained while medics screamed coordinates into radios and soldiers died anyway because sometimes your skill wasn't enough and sometimes the only mercy was doing everything you could anyway. The scalpel touched Webb's skin just below his sternum. Ashley made a single incision, swift, deep, decisive, through skin and ribs. The smell of blood rose immediately, copper and salt. She widened the incision with shears, the blade snapping open with a sound like someone breaking bone. They were. She found the pericardium and opened it, her bare hands entering the open cavity of his chest with the precision of someone who'd done this before when the alternative was watching someone die. Webb's heart lay still. Pale. Massive. A muscle that had learned to stop working. Ashley's hands closed around the ventricles. She began direct cardiac massage, not gentle, never gentle, pressing and releasing with the steady rhythm of someone who understood that blood pressure was the only thing keeping oxygen flowing to a brain that still thought her name was Shadow. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. The monitor traced the rhythm of her hands, compressed, released, compressed, released. Her bare hands inside another human being's body, covered in his blood, keeping him alive through pure force of will and muscle memory that belonged to a version of herself she'd tried to bury. 60 seconds. Her arms burned. Her shoulders screamed. She continued. 90 seconds. The monitor showed a flutter. A few organized beats. A heart considering whether life was worth returning to. 120 seconds. The rhythm improved. A sinus rhythm emerged from the chaos. Faint, but present. The monitor's alarm changed pitch, no longer screaming, now simply alerting. O2 sat climbing, 68%. 72%. 78%. Her hands continued their work. The footsteps that entered Bay 7 at 0323 hours belonged to Drive Whitfield. Ashley didn't look up. She didn't stop the cardiac massage. She didn't acknowledge his presence with anything except continued work, her hands inside another human's chest, her scrub soaked with blood, her entire military career exposed in this single moment of defiance. Whitfield's face went pale. Not with shock at the emergency. With shock at what the emergency meant. At what Ashley had just done. At what he'd just witnessed. He pulled out his phone before Ashley's hands had even left Webb's open chest. His fingers flew across the screen, calling the hospital president, calling the state medical board, calling 2 journalists he apparently kept on retainer for exactly these moments. His voice was high now, frantic, fabricating as he spoke. An unqualified nurse just performed an authorized surgery on a patient. A patient I had specifically ordered transferred. She opened his chest without physician authorization. I have witnesses. He hadn't. There were none. But the lies moved faster than truth ever could. His voice climbed. I want her credentials suspended immediately. I want security informed. I want this documented as gross negligence and practicing beyond scope of license. Ashley finally looked at him. Her hands were dripping. Her scrubs were painted in blood. Her eyes held the flat, measured gaze of someone who'd made peace with consequences 20 years ago in a war zone and had been living in borrowed time ever since. Whitfield took one step backward. Whitfield's phone was already in his hand before he reached the administrative corridor. 3 calls. That's all it took. The hospital president answered on the second ring. We have a situation. Unauthorized surgery. Unqualified staff member. Yes, I'm filing with the state board immediately. His voice carried the practiced certainty of a man whose network had never failed him. Within 8 minutes, the board investigator's car pulled into the parking garage. 12 minutes, 2 journalists from outlets Whitfield kept on retainer arrived with cameras and questions. 16 minutes, security suspended Ashley's credentials while she was still in the trauma bay, her hand still marked with Webb's blood, still holding the sutures she'd used to close what no civilian was permitted to close. Whitfield appeared in the doorway, his expression arranged into something resembling concern. Ashley, I need you to step away from the patient. His voice was careful, official, the tone a man uses when he's being recorded. You've violated multiple protocols. I'm going to have to ask security to escort you. She didn't look up from documenting the procedure. Her notes were precise, factual, chronological. Time of code. Time of intervention. Vital signs response. The clinical language of someone trained to record evidence, not excuses. I understand, Dr. Whitfield. 4 words. Flat delivery. No inflection. The security officer, a younger man named Thompson who'd always nodded at her during shift changes, wouldn't meet her eyes as he approached. "I'm sorry, Ms. Cooper. I'm just following orders." She set down her pen and stepped back from the monitor. The heart rhythm on the screen showed organized sinus activity. General Webb's oxygen saturation was climbing, 78%, 82%, 85%. Stable. The man she'd saved would live. That was the only metric that mattered. Whitfield walked beside her as security escorted her through the corridors, not a request, a performance. Other staff members watched from doorways and nursing stations. The message was clear: this is what happens when you challenge the system. This is what happens when you refuse to look away. The HR director, Patricia Chen, sat behind her desk with her hands folded, unable to meet Ashley's gaze. On the desk in front of her lay the termination papers, already printed, already prepared. "Ms. Cooper, your actions today constitute gross negligence and practicing medicine without a license. You performed a surgical procedure without authorization, without licensure, and without physician supervision." Patricia's voice was practiced, the words clearly not her own. "The hospital has a zero-tolerance policy for patient safety violations. Effective immediately, your employment is terminated. You are to surrender your credentials, your badge, and your access card." Ashley read the document without touching it. The allegations were specifically crafted, not just to justify termination, but to ensure she could never work in healthcare again. The phrase "practicing beyond scope" would follow her name through every background check, every licensing board review, every future employment screening. Whitfield's insurance fraud was now safely protected. The one person who read patient charts carefully, who noticed billing discrepancies, who understood how many doctors had been pressured into abandonment, that person was being removed from the equation. The threat to his operation was being permanently neutralized. Ashley signed her name on the termination line without hesitation. Her signature was steady, the letters precise, the hand of someone who'd signed casualty reports in field hospitals and knew how to keep her composure when the official record was being written. She removed her hospital badge and set it on the desk. 14 years. That's how long she'd worked at Seattle General. 14 years of night shifts, 14 years of saving lives in the quiet hours when no one was watching, 14 years of rebuilding a life that was supposed to have ended in Fallujah. The badge clattered slightly against the laminate desktop. Patricia flinched. Ashley didn't. Security escorted her to the staff locker room, standing outside the door while she changed. The fluorescent light overhead cast everything in a sickly, shadowless glow. She removed her scrubs carefully, smoothing each fold before placing them in the hospital laundry bin. The blood on the sleeve was Webb's, a dark rust-colored smear across the pale blue fabric where she'd leaned across his chest during compression. Her hands had created that contact. Her hands had saved his life. The fabric still held the warmth of the trauma bay, still held the salt smell of blood and sweat and the particular metallic scent of a human body pushed past its limits and brought back. She folded the scrubs anyway. Carefully. As if they still mattered. As if erasing the creases could erase the fact that everything she'd built was now dust. The locker door closed with a soft metallic click. Empty now. No photograph. No personal items. She'd never accumulated much. The lesson of a disappearance is not to leave traces. She pulled on her civilian clothes, jeans, a grey sweater, a denim jacket that had no institutional markings, no identifiers, no connection to the person she'd been for the past 14 years. The security guard walked her to the service entrance. Nobody else was visible. The night shift had moved on. Everyone was focused on the critical cases, the emergencies, the work that kept the hospital running. Ashley had already been forgotten. The rain hit the parking lot like applause, cold and relentless, drumming against the asphalt in a rhythm that sounded almost like gunfire from a distance. She didn't run. She didn't hurry. She walked to her car, a 10-year-old Subaru with 147,000 miles and no special features, and sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine. The windshield fogged immediately from the temperature differential. Outside, the rain continued its assault. Inside, silence. 20 doctors. That was the exact count Whitfield had orchestrated. She'd checked the treatment logs before her termination was finalized. 20 physicians, each one visited by Whitfield personally, each one reminded about departmental budget targets and case profitability, each one making the calculation that a single patient wasn't worth the administrative pressure. 20 refusals. 20 moments where the system had decided that helping didn't matter as much as margins. And then one nurse had decided it did. One nurse had decided that 14 years of burial and anonymity meant nothing compared to the moment a child, now a general, now a man with medals and authority, needed someone to remember that his life was worth saving. She started the engine. The headlights cut through the rain. Somewhere in the hospital, General Marcus Webb's heart was beating in sinus rhythm, his oxygen saturation climbing higher, his survival secured by the only person in the building who understood that some debts don't have statutes of limitations. And somewhere in an administrative office, Dr. Whitfield was already composing his narrative, an unqualified nurse, a rogue action, a system failure that had been corrected. The incident would be closed within 48 hours. The investigation would be concluded by Monday. By next month, there would be a new night shift nurse in that bay, and Ashley Cooper would be a name in a file, erased from the official record just as thoroughly as Master Chief Petty Officer Cooper had been erased 20 years before. The rain drummed harder. She pulled out of the parking lot. But that wasn't the worst part. 3 Black Hawks descended through the Philadelphia twilight like predators circling prey, their rotor wash hammering against the hospital's rooftop helipad with the force of Thor's hammer. The sound rolled down through every floor, a deep, rhythmic percussion that stopped conversations mid-sentence and made the fluorescent lights flicker in the lobby. Security guards who'd served in the Navy went pale. They knew that sound. They knew what it meant. It meant the federal government had arrived, and someone was about to learn what accountability felt like. The side doors of the lead Black Hawk opened and a full military detail descended, 12 personnel in dress blues moving with the terrifying fluid precision of apex predators, their boots striking the rooftop in perfect synchronization. They didn't run. They didn't need to. The clarity of their purpose made running unnecessary. One of them carried a leather file folder stamped with a red classified seal. Another wore the shoulder boards of a 2-star general. The third carried the demeanor of someone who'd already made decisions about careers and fates. They moved through the hospital's interior stairwell, boots on concrete, echoing up through the shaft like a countdown clock. Down past the surgical suites. Down past the imaging wing. Down toward the administrative floor where Dr. Whitfield had spent the last 6 months building an empire on the suffering of people he deemed unprofitable. The general's aide spoke into a radio with a voice like a tank idling in a garage. Angel 6 is moving to target. Stand by. Military protocol. Precision. The kind of choreography that only happens when someone very powerful has decided something very wrong has happened. They reached the lobby, and the entire waiting area went silent. The kind of silence where you could hear individual heartbeats. A mother pulled her child closer. A man on his phone quietly ended his call. The information desk clerk's hands trembled as she looked up at 12 uniformed service members walking toward the main corridor with the kind of certainty that suggests they'd already reviewed every blueprint, already knew exactly where they were going, already understood every tactical variable. The general, a man whose presence made the air pressure change, whose jaw could cut glass, whose eyes held the unmistakable clarity of someone who'd made life-and-death decisions for 40,000 people, stepped directly to the information desk. His voice, when he spoke, was measured and precise. I need to find the administrative offices. Now. It wasn't a request. It was a command. The kind that requires immediate compliance. The lobby security guard, a man named Hayes, Navy discharge, 22 years of service, honorable, stepped forward. His voice cracked slightly as he recognized the insignia. "Sir, that's a two-star general." He swallowed. His eyes landed on the details: uniforms, the insignia patches, the classified file folder. "That's a Master Chief Petty Officer pin. One of the highest enlisted ranks in Special Forces." His voice carried across the suddenly silent lobby like a bell struck underwater. Every person in the waiting area turned. Nurses stopped charting. Residents stopped moving. A blood pressure monitor beeped into the quiet like a metronome counting down to something inevitable. The general didn't break stride. He was already moving toward the administrative corridor, his detail flanking him in formation that suggested they'd trained this exact movement 100 times. The folder, the one with the red classified seal, remained held against his chest like a weapon more dangerous than anything made of steel. 30 seconds later, the general stood in Dr. Whitfield's office. Whitfield was at his desk, still wearing the expression of someone who believed his network was impenetrable, his allies unshakable, his position unassailable. The general placed the folder on the desk with the kind of deliberate slowness that suggested he was placing a grenade. "Dr. Marcus Whitfield. I'm Brigadier General James Halloway, Deputy Commander of Medcom, Medical Command. I'm here regarding your treatment of General Marcus Webb and your termination of Master Chief Petty Officer Ashley Cooper." Whitfield's face went the color of old bone. The general opened the file. His voice, as he read, was steady, the voice of someone reading facts so thoroughly documented that they transcended argument. "Master Chief Ashley Cooper, United States Navy Special Operations Command, SEAL Team 3 Detachment. Navy Cross recipient, 2004. Citation, for extraordinary heroism in action against an armed enemy." He paused. Every word was landing like a hammer strike. Master Chief Cooper credited with saving 47 lives under fire in Fallujah, Jolan District, during Operation Phantom Fury. Her actions during a compound breach on March 14, 2004, resulted in her placing her own body between insurgent weapons fire and an 8-year-old child. Another pause. The folder stayed open. The photo inside showed a younger Ashley, fierce, focused, alive in a way that had been buried for 20 years under night shifts and careful invisibility. That child was Marcus Webb, currently a decorated general in the United States Army. General Webb spent the last 20 years trying to locate the medic who saved his life. He finally succeeded. And when he arrived at this hospital, you refused him treatment. 20 different physicians refused him. All because you found his case financially inconvenient. Whitfield's mouth opened. Nothing came out. His hand, resting on the desk beside his computer, started to tremble. The general watched it with the dispassion of someone observing a laboratory specimen. "You terminated Master Chief Cooper based on fabricated allegations. You called her an unqualified nurse. You filed reports with the state medical board claiming she performed unauthorized surgery." The general's voice dropped lower. "You did this to protect a fraud scheme. You've been inflating billing codes. You've been steering cases to a private surgical center in exchange for 30% kickbacks. For 18 months, you've been stealing from this hospital's budget while denying care to veterans." The door opened. General Marcus Webb stood in the threshold, moving slowly with a walker, his recovered stroke-damaged left side still managing the weight. His eyes, the same eyes that had watched Ashley shield him from bullets 20 years ago, found Whitfield's face and held it without mercy. In Webb's right hand, held with the care you reserve for sacred objects, was the tarnished military challenge coin. The one Ashley had pressed into his 8-year-old palm in a Fallujah field hospital, its surface marked with shrapnel scars and his own dried blood from 2 decades past. Webb raised his left hand. His speech had recovered to 60% clarity, but sign language needed no recovery. His hands moved with surgical precision. "She took 3 bullets meant for me when I was a child." His hands continued moving, each gesture carrying the weight of 20 years of searching. "I spent 2 decades trying to find the medic who disappeared. They told me she didn't exist. That the operation was classified. That I was imagining things. That a child couldn't have survived what I survived. His hands paused. His eyes went to the challenge coin. I found her working a night shift at this hospital. And when I arrived bleeding from a stroke, you threw her away. Webb's voice, when he spoke, was low and lethal. You're a coward. You always have been. The room went so quiet you could hear the rain outside hammering the windows like applause for what was coming next. The general turned to face Whitfield directly. His posture suggested he was about to render a verdict from which there was no appeal. Dr. Marcus Whitfield, you are terminated from your position effective immediately. Your medical credentials are suspended pending full investigation by the Inspector General of the Department of Defense. Military police will be escorting you from this facility. He nodded to the two uniformed officers flanking the door. They moved forward with the fluid precision of people who'd executed this exact maneuver countless times. The United States military takes care of its own, Doctor. Master Chief Cooper is one of ours. You violated federal code the moment you filed false reports against a service member operating under protected status. That's a federal offense. You will be contacted by the JAG office, that's the Judge Advocate General, within 24 hours. Whitfield's voice cracked like old plaster. You can't just, I have rights, this is a civilian hospital, I'm a licensed physician. The general cut him off with a single raised hand. You had rights. You forfeited them when you committed fraud. You forfeited them when you refused care to a decorated officer. He signaled to the JAG officers, who immediately began photographing Whitfield's face, his office, his computer screens. The hospital security cameras were recording. The news cameras in the lobby were rolling. Everything was being documented. Everything was being preserved. The Department of Defense will be conducting a full audit of Seattle General's billing practices, insurance authorizations, and patient care decisions for the past 18 months. I believe you'll find some very interesting patterns. Two military police officers moved forward. Dr. Whitfield, you're not under arrest at this moment, but we strongly suggest you remain available for questioning. Their presence wasn't a suggestion. It was a statement of fact delivered by men whose job was enforcing it. The hospital president appeared in the doorway, his face already red with the color of someone who understood the magnitude of what was happening. He opened his mouth. The general didn't give him time to speak. Mr. President, I trust you'll want to cooperate fully with this investigation. Master Chief Cooper will be reinstated with full back pay and a formal apology. You'll also want to prepare a public statement about the hospital's new protocols regarding veteran care. The general's voice carried the weight of command authority. Every word was a directive, not a negotiation. Failure to cooperate will result in the Department of Defense reviewing whether this facility continues to receive federal Medicare and Medicaid funding. I believe that represents approximately 63% of your annual revenue. From the lobby, reporters' voices erupted. The journalists Whitfield had kept on retainer months ago, the ones he'd called to fabricate stories about Ashley, were now turning their cameras on him. A woman from Channel 7 News held her microphone forward. Dr. Whitfield, did you know about Nurse Cooper's military service when you terminated her? Another reporter, is it true you refused care to General Webb for financial reasons? A third, how do you respond to allegations of Medicare fraud? Whitfield's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, the hospital president removing him from all administrative email lists in real time. Another buzz, the state medical board scheduling an emergency review hearing. Another, his personal attorney requesting an immediate consultation. The board members who'd supported him 30 minutes ago now studied the floor with sudden interest. His network, his protection, his entire ecosystem of power, evaporating like morning fog. The military police officers escorted him toward the exit. Every phone in the lobby was recording. Hospital staff lined the corridors, watching in absolute silence. The impact was immediate. By the time Whitfield reached the ground level, news channels were already updating their tickers. Hospital chief fired after refusing care to decorated general. By the time he reached his car, the internet had his name. By the time he drove out of the parking lot, his medical license was officially suspended pending investigation. The rain hammered harder as he left. Behind him, in Seattle General's emergency department, the real work was beginning. 6 months later, Ashley Cooper walked through the same corridors, not as a night shift nurse working invisibly in the margins, but as the director of emergency medicine. The hospital board had personally recruited her after the Dodd audit revealed $4,700,000 in fraudulent billing. Her office overlooked the trauma bays where she once worked in silence. Her window had a view of the helipad where the Black Hawks had landed. On the wall behind her desk hung a framed photograph, General Marcus Webb kneeling before her in that lobby, his head bowed in gratitude so profound it transcended language. His right hand was pressed over his heart. His left held the tarnished challenge coin. The image captured the exact moment he'd signed "Thank you" in ASL and pressed the coin back into her palm. Ashley touched the challenge coin now, mounted in a shadow box beside her medical licenses. Both of them. The nursing credential and the emergency medicine physician credential the military had helped her obtain through an accelerated program. 2 identities. 2 careers. One woman who'd finally stopped hiding. A knock. Dr. Rodriguez, the former security guard, now completing his medical residency under Ashley's mentorship, entered with a patient file. "We have an uninsured veteran in Bay 3. Homeless." The on-call attending is hesitating because of the resource allocation. Ashley was already standing. "I'll take the case." As she walked past him, she added quietly, "We don't hesitate for our own. Not here. Not ever." Across the city, in a strip mall parking lot between a tax preparation service and a vape shop, Dr. Marcus Whitfield sat at a folding table beneath a hand-printed sign, "Supplemental insurance, low rates." A woman walked past without making eye contact. A man in a baseball cap took his card and threw it away in the trash bin 2 stores down. His phone sat silent. His calls weren't returned. His network had evaporated the moment the federal government arrived. Insurance companies had blacklisted him. Other physicians wouldn't refer cases to him. He'd been reduced to what he'd made Ashley feel like: invisible, discarded, erased. In her office that evening, Ashley mentored 3 new nurses. All veterans transitioning to civilian healthcare. All struggling with the same thing she'd struggled with: how to be visible, how to be valued, how to stop apologizing for strength. One of them asked, "How do you handle the people who don't respect what we've done?" Ashley considered the question, her fingers absently touching the challenge coin. She didn't need to think long. Power is not a title. Power is the ability to help. She met each of their eyes. Everything else is just noise. Outside, a Black Hawk passed overhead, its running lights blinking against the Philadelphia twilight like a heartbeat. Ashley watched it disappear into the distance, then turned back to her nurses, the one she was teaching, the one she was protecting, the one she would never let vanish like she'd almost vanished. Some skills, she understood now, were too valuable to keep hidden. Some stories needed to be told. Some silences needed to be broken. She'd spent 20 years becoming invisible. It was time to teach others how to become visible instead. We appreciate every one of you watching. Please hit like if you're enjoying this, subscribe if you want more stories like it, and leave a comment telling us where you're tuning in from.